All right. Well, good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
How's everybody?
Good evening.
Hey, everyone.
Hey,
Hello.
all these smiling faces. Did y'all have a day off from work today?
No.
I earned my paycheck today. I don't know about you guys,
Did
but
you?
I really did. I'm doing the after school tutoring.
Yeah, you don't want to be like me. I have to back up to the boss man on payday because I can't look him in the eye. I just loafed another month. Oh, it's like money for nothing.
Telling
Dr.
you.
Lamb, so
Yes.
I have I'm investigating because I'm nosy, but if you have a microwave behind your head, that means you're at the lake, right?
I'm at Lake Lure.
Okay.
That
I
is
was like,
correct.
he has to be at his other, is it camper or now I'm
No,
just
I have a condo here.
a condo?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm
I
being
have-
nosy. I'm sorry.
I just sit in the kitchen here.
Okay.
I like sitting in the kitchen rather than somewhere else. But no, I've got
Me too.
now I have an office at the house at Lake Norman. I have an office there, but we don't set one up here, and so my wife won't let me do that because we have guests in here, so I can't take over the room. So I just set up in the kitchen here while I'm by myself. I prefer to be in the kitchen anyway.
I said, I'm going to ask one day, and then one day I'm going to set my goals to have a Lake Lure house and a other house with an office.
Yeah, the Lake Norman house. Now that's the big house.
Oh,
But
okay.
I couldn't afford that. And today I've lived in that house for 27 years. Is the only reason I can afford to live at Lake Norman. I made a lot more money back in those days, but oh no, I couldn't live there.
Mr. Lair, I had a question. It's a little off the subject, but when do you recommend us to take praxis?
As soon as this class is over. As soon as this class is over, you'll be fine to take the praxis. But don't take it until this one's over.
Okay.
Because a lot of the questions you get are scenario law questions on the praxis. Now you could, the best thing to do, let me share my screen. Let's get started. Welcome everybody. The best thing to do, share screen, share. Go back here. Under South Carolina praxis materials here in our class shell, if you'll click on that, it'll take you to this website, the praxis test, prepare for your test. It'll let you take it will let you take a praxis test, a practice for free. Interactive practice test. And so what you'll find out is under resources, test prep materials, do those test prep, path, videos, webinars, strategies, and tips. And at home testing, you can do this, but it'll let you do a practice if you register. And that would be your best, this interactive practice test right here. That would be your best bet to do that. And so as soon as this class is over, before you forget a lot of this stuff, it would be the time to do that. So that's a good question. Remembering I'll stop my share again. Remembering North Carolina people, as of right now, you don't have to take it unless you are the EDCI folks who do have to take it. There is an anomaly in state policy. To get your curriculum instruction specialist license, you have to take the administrative praxis. So that's why every fall we have a large group of the EDCI doctorals from Gardner Webb switch over for a semester and do 601 and 603 with us. We do it low residency. They have to meet every week and have to meet weekends too. And they do 12 credit hours in one semester to get them ready to take that exam. They get their administrative license and their curriculum license when they take the exam. Now, for South Carolina people, you have to take it. It's part of that's part of the deal for South Carolina. North Carolina people, y'all got another waiver. So we're in the end of the third year. We got a waiver for 2 years and we got a waiver for 2 more years. And so the current waiver is good until August of 2024. Now, as you know, politicians and those kinds of things, at any time they could decide to stop the waiver. But it right now is good till August 24. And they may give another 2 years after that. This is the second 2-year waiver they've done. But I think this time.
And by the waiver, y'all don't have to, with the waiver, y'all don't have to take it, or
in North Carolina, you don't have to take it unless you're an EDCI doctoral student. If you're an EDCI doctoral student, you do have to take it. Because as crazy as it sounds, that's the exam they give them for CNI. I don't know why. There is not a CNI exam. And so the irony is the EDCIs do have to take it, and the LS folks, the admin folks, don't have to take it. And that's a quirk in the law, and that's why there's a waiver still right now. But that waiver is going to go away eventually. So if you're South Carolina, that's why it says SC Praxis. And as soon as North Carolina is required, it'll say SC/NC Praxis. It's the same test. You have to take it. All right.
Okay.
Other questions?
Thank you.
I have a question about, I probably should know this, but after 603, there's one more class to take, like over the summer.
That's correct.
And what is it?
605 leadership.
Okay.
And you'll be spending a lot of time on 2 things. One will be North Carolina executive standards, and the other will be on personal leadership.
Okay.
You'll do the Gallup, the Strength Finder, North House. You'll do a lot of personal leadership kinds of things, developing your personal leadership style and power, your dispositional behaviors, those kinds of things. It's more about working on you when you get to that last semester to begin to step out.
And what month do they go through?
You'll
What
start
month will
on
those
May
605?
17th and you'll go through the last Friday in July. 10 weeks.
Oh, wow.
Now, remembering we're going to attempt to get you started on the CAP. That's a good question. If you look at the calendar, we're going to attempt to get through the OMA and the SKIP and get at least through the first, hopefully get through the first 2, and we won't even pretend like class is over in May. You'll just stay with me those 2 weeks in between the spring and the summer starting. And the reason why is we don't want to get caught in a situation, because if you look ahead at the CAP, you've got to have some people in the building that you can talk with to collect some qualitative data. And the problem that we get into in summer school is, what happens in May. It starts getting dicey about meeting with teachers anyway, because of testing and test prep and all that. But you definitely don't want to get to June, because there'll be nobody in your building, and you've got to chase people down to do this qualitative work. So you got to knock out the CAP and the SIOP in the summer. Now, the good news about the SIOP, the 6th of the evidences, is there's no new work. It's a compilation of the first 5 that you did. You just have to put it together in the right order. And of course, I have that. Let me share my screen. And so what I have for you is, let's see if I have it here. Let's see. We've got the CAP materials, and so we'll get to that. But also, let's see if I have it under course overview. I don't think I do, but I'll give it to you a little bit later. So I'll pull it up right here out of this. So what I will do is my gift to you, make it easier for you to do your song. I'm going to give you a template. I'm going to give you this one that has the prompts, and it tells you in red where you go and find this stuff. All you got to do is it's a plug and play, copy and paste. You just got to go find it and do what it says in red for each one of them. Tells you exactly where that stuff is. Just like that. And the reason why we've been having you do the same graphic organizer every time is when you get to task 5, you have to put them all together. Now, if you've used different ones that don't mesh, it's going to be a bear to put those things together. But if you've used the same one every time as we told you to, your working copy will be fine. So this is quite seriously, this is 1 2-hour work session. You know, finding all your stuff and putting it together. Now you'll have to go back and edit it and do some linking narrative. Y'all know what that means. But you'll have all your stuff right there in front of you. You go through and edit it. That'll be another couple hours. That's a 4-hour project to put the SIOP together if you follow the directions. Now, if you just go stumbling around and don't include all the stuff, that's when you get in trouble. But the SIOP is not a bear. So it's relatively easy to knock out the CAP and the SIOP in 10 weeks if you have teachers in your building where you can do your qualitative work, where you can go and ask them. You know, you got to go and do some interviews with teachers at your qualitative in the CAP. So we'll get to that, but that's a great question. So looking ahead at the CAP, let me share my screen again. So here's the trick. The CAP is breaking down the teacher working condition surveys in 5 specific areas. There's 12 areas on the TWC. You break it down in 5 required areas. Now, the trick is you can add more, but you can't not do those 5. The problem that we get into in the CAP is folks say, well, I want to do these. Well, you can do those. You can add managing student conduct if you want to, but you can't drop one of the 5 that's required. So when we look at the CAP, you're going to look at 5 areas of the teacher working conditions survey: time, facilities, resources, teacher leadership, and school leadership. You're going to look at those 5, and if you want to add, you know, managing student conduct or any of that kind of stuff, you can add more than the 5. But here I've got for you the task and prompt, South Carolina and North Carolina, because South Carolina you're using that state survey rather than TWC, but it's the same thing. So what you're going to do is you're going to analyze 5 areas right here. The analysis of the climate will include data related to 5 areas. These 5: empowerment, which is teacher leadership, which is school leadership, facilities, resources, and time. You cannot not do those. And every task, every prompt, you will refer back to those 5. You won't just look at them in task 1, then jump onto something else you want to do in task 2. Those 5 will be consistent. When you get to your action plan in the last task, task 4, you will address each of those 5 areas in your action plan. You'll say, for time, here's our specific activities, and go right across your graphic organizer. And then, you know, your needs assessment, we'll be looking at your TWC, but here's the piece that I have the most problem with that people don't understand. The candidate is to use quantitative data instruments to collect specific data and help understand perceptions. All right, demonstrate. They're qualitative. The quantitative data is the teacher working condition survey or the survey in South Carolina. That's attached to your report card, the Cognia survey. That's the quantitative piece. It'll tells you the numbers, how many agree, and all that. The qualitative, candidates must demonstrate qualitative data through surveys, observations, and interviews. Now, we don't do surveys. Survey is actually quantitative. Observations and interviews. You need to be able to talk to people about the recommendations and say, here's the problem with time. Don't have enough planning time. Here's a possible solution. What do you think about that? You need to be able to do interviews. You got to take qualitative. Quantitative tells you what the numbers are. Qualitative tells you why they're that way. The classic example here is from time. If you just looked at a teacher working condition survey and teachers reported they didn't have enough time for planning, without talking to them, you would just assume that the fix would be to put more planning time in the master schedule. But we all know you can't do that. If you do that, it's going to blow up your class size. So, but if you went and talked to them, this is what teachers will tell you. I don't need more planning time in the schedule. I need to be able to take the planning time I got because I'm always covering classes. So the solution to the time problem is not more planning time in the schedule. It's hire substitutes, you cheapskates, pay the money. That's the solution to that problem. But you don't get that unless you go and talk to people. We want you to have a conversation with folks about those kinds of things. Now, Dr. Griffin Jordan, who is our principal expert, the resident principal expert here, she will tell you that that's the best practice anytime you have issues at your school is to go and talk with people. Imagine that. Dr. Griffin Jordan, I'll let you amplify that point.
That is the best way because you do not want staff members or other members to develop their own version of the truth or go and complain because, you know, you've told everybody else, but she just won't come to me and I'm not sure what I've done. So by going directly to the person, you not only let them know that, you know, you're trying to be professional and you're going about it the right way, but it sends a message that the he said, she said, and that stuff happens a lot. So you've got to do what you can do to make sure that doesn't happen under your watch. It'll decrease it. It'll even hopefully allow you will be a model and it'll allow your staff to see that that is the way to go because they're going to take their messages from you. And if you're not doing that, then, you know, you're going to have circles running in the school of little cliques of people saying things and not, you know, going to that person. So, and also you're teaching the children, you're supposed to be teaching your students to speak up for themselves and advocate for themselves. And, you know, if there's a problem you have with someone, you know, you go to that person. So you've got to model that for your staff and your students.
Exactly. And, you know, it says that you can collect qualitative data by survey. Not really. I teach methodology in the doctoral program. That's my actual real gig here. I'm a statistician by trade. I'm a quantitative person. And I can tell you the reason why a lot of people like quantitative is it's impersonal. Send a survey. If you really want qualitative data, which is quality, to understand why things that you need to talk with people. It shows respect for them and that there's some dignity and that you respect them. And that if you just send them a survey asking them why things are, that sends a bad message. So we want you out talking with people about some suggestions how to improve these particular 5 areas of your working condition survey, and you may add some more. A lot of times students will add managing student conduct if that's an issue in their school. Now, full disclosure. Now listen to this carefully. Don't, you know, I want you to understand. If you are a principal of a school and on your state report card, it reports the number of acts of crime and violence, and it reports the number of suspensions. Let's look at that. This is very, very important for down the road. So if we went to the state report card, we'll use the North Carolina one, but South Carolina one is very much the same. So if we went to the Carolina report card, and we went to here. Okay, so I'm gonna do this one. Since nobody in this group is from this one, I'm gonna do this one. Here we go. So it talks about your performance, which is your competency level or your comparative accountability. And then it talks about your growth. And it has, your economics, your college, and your career ready. This is a high school. It has proficiency in your tested areas, other measures. Your national board certified teacher, teacher qualification, emergency license, the total number of student enrollment, the average course size right here. When you get to this part right here, all right, so what do you see for this one right here? On short-term suspensions, this school exceeds the county average or the district average and exceeds the state average. Perfect example of what I'm talking about. The criminal acts right here, 1.56. The county average is 5.65 and the state 7.51. All right. But look at the bullying and harassment numbers here. Above the county and the state average. Suspensions above the county and state average. So any of these things, if this one, and it is, this one it's not, this one is, any of those three things, bullying and harassment. Now, you're going to have a bullying plan already. We talked about that last week. You've got to have a bullying plan. Everybody's got to have one. Everybody's got to have a bullying plan. That's a requirement. But if either this criminal acts or the suspension, which this one does right here, we see that. So what does that mean? Well, I can tell you what it means. When you write your school improvement plan, you have to add an additional section called a safety plan, where you're going to have to analyze student behavior from your teacher working condition survey and develop a plan to get those out of school suspensions down. It's going to be an addendum or another section in your school improvement plan. That will be required if your school does one of two things or both: exceeds the state and the local on out of school suspensions, and or exceeds the state and the local number of acts of violent acts. You're going to have to write a school safety plan to add to your school improvement plan. It will be in one more section, just like the others. So a lot of folks go ahead and get practice. I hate to say that. That sounds terrible, doesn't it? But it's the truth. A lot of students go ahead and do 6 areas on their cap because they know they need to practice, because the school that they're in, that's likely to happen. So it wouldn't be a bad idea. You're not required to, again, you're not required to, but just understand that when you get out in the real world and you're in a school that does, you're going to have to write. You're going to have to do that same thing that you did for the 5 required. You're going to have to do it for that one as well. And you're going to have to add that. And you're going to have to go talk to people and say, here's our numbers. Here's some possible recommendations to fix these suspensions. What do you think? You're going to be required to do that. This is all real life stuff. What we have you doing and everything is how you actually build a school improvement plan. Now, one of the things that I had a question from a student this past week in 605, we were working on, they were working on task 4 where they're putting the resources together. And they have to pull those out separately in task 4, the site where they're putting together their school improvement plan. And they asked me, well, why do we have to identify our resources? Well, here, Dr. Griffin Jordan can tell you this better than I can, but I'll tell you. When you develop your school improvement plan, you cannot add any activities to the plan that you don't have the resources on hand to pull it off when you put it in the plan. Let me say that again. You have to have identified both the money and the personnel required to do it, and both must be on hand before you can add that item to your school improvement plan. You better get in the habit of that now. Understanding is oh, this is what we're going to do if we get $1 million grant. No, that doesn't go in your plan. Do you have the $1 million grant? Well, no, we're hoping. Hope's not a plan. This is a plan. So you got to understand how this works. You got to have the resources on hand to put anything in your school improvement plan. And you're going to have to address the areas that we've addressed in each of these. These are the required areas that, you know, your academic one, your app cell, you got to do growth plan, you got to do master schedule, you got to have to do a parent involvement plan, and you're going to have to do a plan to improve your teacher working condition survey. And then additionally, you're going to have to add another one for discipline, school safety, if you exceed either of those two metrics. But you've got to have the resources on hand, and you got to go out and talk to people about what we can do to fix this. And that also helps with staff buy-in and transparency as well. So the whole notion of everything that we do in our evidence work is to train you how to be a school administrator, but also that when you get out there, you understand that we're about putting together a school improvement plan and making it work, and it not just putting it on the shelf somewhere. That this is how you go about doing this. So that's the whole notion. Questions you have for me? I like questions.
Dr. Lamb, I would like to add, with that school improvement plan, I'm not sure exactly what the question is. There's a question about budgeting, and does your school improvement team help set the budget for your school, or
Yes.
are they involved in budgeting? That's what Dr. Lamb was telling you. That's what he's talking about. If they don't know anything about the budget, how can you plan for the intervention and the tutoring and the family engagement events? You have to have a planned budget, and then that's what your school improvement team will work for, to make sure you have the staff, you have the resources to implement that plan. So they have to know that part of your budget. So it's not like you're just, giving your budget away. It's necessary for the school to thrive, and for that school improvement team to be able to successfully implement their plan.
Exactly. That's why at the end of task 1 of the OMA, we asked what is the involvement of your school improvement team in that budgeting process? What good does it do to come up with all these great ideas and activities to improve your school through your school improvement plan if you don't put your budget behind it and you don't involve those stakeholders in it? It's not going to happen. And what good does it do to do all that and then and then ignore that and give, let teachers decide what schedule they're going to have and who they're going to be teaching, and you got people teaching stuff that they don't need to be teaching, and you don't get any performance. You control your school through your budget, the school improvement team, and the school improvement plan, and your master schedule. Remember that triangle? The master schedule and the budget support the school improvement plan. That's how you win in school, folks. I'll just tell you right now. This is the secret to school. This is it. This is the big reveal. This is how you win. This is how your kids achieve. This is how you make it as a school administrator. You work that master schedule. You work that budget. It supports that school improvement plan. You know how to develop each section of that plan to get the maximum performance out of your school and your kids and your teachers, and your money and your schedule support that. You bring your stakeholders along with you, and good things happen for you. This is how you win. This is the secret. That's why you paid these ridiculous prices to come here to Gardner Webb. This is the secret. Truly it is. This is the secret to how you achieve and how you perform and how you excel as a school administrator. And we never deviate from this, ever. You'll see it. You've seen it every semester. You will see it. We never deviate from this, ever.
And Dr. Lamb, I serve as our sit chair. Our county will kick back your school improvement plan. They will kick it back, and I've seen administrators work on this tirelessly throughout the year until they got it right. They will not send it to the board, any place, if it's not right.
That's exactly right. They know that it's the heart of your school. It determines whether you're going to be successful or not. And they will kick that thing back if you haven't gone in and disaggregate. Remember, you learned how to disaggregate. If you don't have evidence that you disaggregated your data, or your most pressing need that you were working on academically, there's no support, or it's some insignificant thing, they'll kick it back. You don't have the resources to do it, they'll kick it back. You don't have a plan for your teachers to grow, they'll kick it back. Your discipline numbers are beyond the tolerance levels, they'll kick it back. Where's your safety plan? Now, here's the thing, and I can tell you as somebody who did this, and I'll go biblical. Now, it says in the Bible that you need to go to church on Sunday. Now, if you have an emergency, and the metaphor that they use, of course, it'd be a fable since an animal was involved, is if your ox is in the ditch on Sunday, you can get him out rather than come to church, because that's an emergency. But if your ox is in the ditch every Sunday, you need a new ox. And that's why the second time that I turned the school improvement plan back to a principal, I reminded them it's going to be time for a new ox if I have to send it back another time. I'll give you 2, but after 2, it's going to be time for a new ox. And so that became metaphor for a long time in CMS, new ox. We'll get somebody else if you can't get this right. We're going to, the problem now, the problem is mine, because initially the problem was yours that you couldn't get this right. The problem after 2 times, the problem is mine that I didn't let you go and get me somebody that could do it right. So you don't think these things won't boomerang back on you, but again, I thought I was being more than generous, giving them twice. I'd send it back once, but I better not send it back more than once. I'm gonna be looking for me somebody else. This is grown people talk here, because we're playing for keeps. A lot of money out there. There's a lot of public scrutiny. These are tax dollars. You got to do better. And so we have painstakingly taught you every small, minute detail of how to work every one of these to get a school improvement plan that can improve your school. And it's not just a paper thing, that it's real, it's research based. You've got, you know your numbers, you know what you need to do to fix it. You've got everybody in line, you've got all your stakeholders involved, your master schedule and your budget point to your school improvement plan. And now we just got to go put it in practice. That's the deal. We work that plan. We plan our work and work our plan. But Sandy's exactly right. You better believe it's coming back. If it's not exactly right, you better believe it's coming back. Now, hopefully in Sandy's district, they're a lot more lenient than I was, but my hair and my patience left at the same time. Full disclosure. I'm still Saul on the road to Damascus. I'm not Paul yet. I'm not as good a person as I portray on video. I can tell you that. In real life, it would not be a good thing for it to come back more than twice. That would not go well. But it matters. That's the point. All right, let's look at our weekly schedule right quick before we go to our case study tonight. Let me share my screen and we'll see where we are. I believe we're in week 7, which means we got one more. Let me move this out of the way. We got one more. So we got one more week where we're going to talk about special ed, and your activities are attend an IEP meeting. Some of you have already done that, and my response back is make sure you understand. There's due process. You got to follow all the rules. But the one thing that too many administrators make the mistake of early on is, that the school did all the work, did all the paperwork, and then they go to the meeting and think that means that the school gets to decide what happened. Meetings are collaborative and decisions are collaborative with the parents. And what that means is sometimes they won't go along and then it gets ugly. But it's the point to remember is IEP meetings are a contract, they're collaborative, parent has to agree. And then the other thing is interview your chair of your MTSS or care team or SST. Normally this is MTSS. But I'm going to start putting MTSS. Everybody's supposed to have it now. And so, and the thing to remember here is what does your school offer? I mean, what are they supposed to get? And then what do they get? That's again, that substantive and procedural due process. What are kids supposed to get? And remembering that MTSS is the 90 before the 90, and we'll talk about that next week. It's the 90 days of interventions before the 90 days that you go in to do the process leading up to EC testing or not. And so you need to find out what your school offers, what level are you in MTSS? It should have been fully implemented by now, but COVID slowed us down for 2 years. But I know at least everybody is on the MTSS scale, even if you're only doing 30 days. Everybody's not up to 90 yet, but we should have been fully vested by now, but we're not. And I know that. But find out where you are, what your kids are supposed to get and what they're getting. Talk to your intervention team, your MTSS chair about that. Remembering that those kids get the same, they get the same protections as if they were already in an EC program during this process. But the whole notion of MTSS is not remediation. The notion is not to get quickly to testing. The notion is to find a way for every kid to succeed along the way. This is not a remedial program. It's to find a way for kids to succeed. So you need to do those and interview those. I would highly recommend talking with these people rather than sending them an email or a note. Talk with folks. You learn a lot more. And then when we finish next week, we'll be halfway through. We'll have our spring break, and it's going to go really fast after that. You know how to do the skip. It's pretty easy. We've already covered it. And so you can go back and refer to that 13 minutes from last week at the 55-minute mark. If you need me to talk with you more, just let me know and I'll work with you individually. All right, so that's where we are. We're at case study 2. We'll do exceptional children, and then we'll take a week off. Now, that doesn't mean you take a week off from your evidence work. Keep on working, but you won't have to have class during the week of spring break. All right. So let me stop my share. So Terrence got in touch with me and he said that his group wants to go last. Is that correct? All right. So this week's lineup, we'll go with team 3. So is that, we're going to go 3, 1, 2, 4 this week. So Jessica, is that your group 3? So y'all go first, share your screen and let's get after it. So tonight is about the superintendent's plan to redistribute the money in the school district. This case reverts back to the Leandro case, which is a national case that's centered in North Carolina, where low wealth districts sued the state and said that per pupil that they were given for education was not comparable to what the wealthy districts were spending. And they wanted the state to equalize the final dollar amount through modifying the initial amount. So let me explain that quickly. In 1966, North Carolina and most states got out of capital funding for buildings. And so the low wealth districts have a hard time putting any money into actual education. They're spending all their money on their buildings, on capital. But the wealthy districts like my home county in Mecklenburg, they add an additional $4,000 a year per pupil to the now $8,000, so they spend $12,000 per year on the education of the child. Low wealth districts, all they can spend is the state money. They don't have any local money to add because their local money is going to pay for their buildings. And so that's what the Leandro case was about. And so Jessica and Kelly are going to tell us what they found out.
All right.
Trying to minimize myself.
All right, so case study, I think Kelly, you're going to start off.
Yep, I am. This kind of goes into what Dr. Lamb just said. So we started off by summarizing the case and looking at what it actually was. So in 1994, a lawsuit was filed against the state of North Carolina. It was filed by 5 low wealth school districts and parents who children went to those school districts. And they argued that their children were not receiving an equal education as wealthier districts within the state of North Carolina. And because of that, they felt like their children weren't receiving the same level of education. Ultimately, what it boiled down to is they argued that a child's level of education should not be determined by where they're born. It shouldn't matter if you're in a low wealth district or a high wealth district. Everybody should be guaranteed and have confidence in the fact that their children are receiving a quality education. It went to the North Carolina Supreme Court. And what the Supreme Court came back with is that all students have the constitutional right to receive a sound basic education. I kind of found that, and Jessica and I talked about it a little bit, the terminology that they use, the sound basic education, it's going to be referred to over and over again as we kind of go through the rest of the case.
All right, let me ask you a question. So what they're saying is you're not that the 14th Amendment does not count here. Equal protection under the law. Now, why wouldn't the 14th Amendment count here? Well, because public schooling is not covered in the Constitution. Let me say that again. Public schooling is not covered in the Constitution. The preamble to the Constitution says that states may provide public education. So you don't get the protection of the 14th Amendment, equal protection under the law. That's exactly what Kelly is saying is. And it's curious, but what the Supreme Court found was you only get the minimum, folks. As the state only is going to pay for the minimum, period. We're not going to pay for the bells and whistles and the frills that we get in Charlotte-Mecklenburg. They're willing to pay for that. They have the tax base. They can do it. All we're going to fund you is the bare minimum, a basic education. We're not going to, you're not going to get IB. You're not going to get AP. You're not going to get all that kind of stuff. That's a bell and a whistle. I would argue that it's not, but that's what they said is you get the bare minimum. That's all we're going to fund. We're going to call that your Leandro right? Like that they're giving you something. What they're actually telling you is you get the bare minimum. You get just enough to get you by. We're going to give you enough to basically train your kids to get a high school diploma and a job, and that's it. Anything extra? No. If you want that, you're going to have to move to someplace and do that. We were talking, and part of the reason, and I wasn't being boastful. I'm in a county, a low wealth county tonight. My property here, my evaluation is much lower than it would be in Mecklenburg, but my millage is about half. Let me say that again. In this low wealth county, I pay about, I guess city and county, because I'm in the town of Lake Lure here, I pay about 70 cents for every $100 of evaluation. I pay more than twice that. I pay $1 and $1.50 in Mecklenburg County per $100 of evaluation. Let me say that again. I pay 70 cents here. I pay $1.50 there because that extra money goes to schools. There is no extra money here. You get a basic education here, and that's it. And you're lucky to get that, as we just looked at one of their schools. You're lucky to get that. So the court said, nope, we're not going to take from the wealthy and give to the poor. We're going to give everybody the same. And if you can add to it, fine. And if you can't, too bad, so sad.
Okay, so the ruling that was stated from the Leandro case was that the court stated school districts did not have a constitutional right to funding. However, all children in North Carolina have a constitutional right to receive a sound basic education. As Dr. Lamb was saying, it's like the bare minimum, no bells and whistles, even though the parents argued that to be competitive in today's society, it's almost, you need those extra things. If your child wants to go to college, they don't really have the ability to compete with those kids who are from wealthier districts. The Supreme Court also ruled that the state of North Carolina has the responsibility to deliver every child's Leandro right. It is not the responsibility of the school district to do that. There's a lot of things that, go ahead, I'm sorry.
I'm interrupting. So what that point is, not only is the state not going to give low wealth more, or that but the money has to follow each individual kids. So not only is the state not going to give more over here where it costs more to educate or these low wealth kids to try to get them up, the district can't do that either. That's what that means. Not only is the state not going to do it, you can't take the money that we give you and give more to some kids in your district than others. You got to give everybody the same. You're not allowed to differentiate the level of money. Now, we know that some kids are harder and more expensive to educate than others. Don't care. Money follows the kid, period. You can't take $100 off of this kid and give it to this kid over here, because basically money means teachers, the number of teachers. That's what it means, because that 85% of the state money that the district gets per pupil goes to pay for teacher salaries. So you can't take 100 off every kid in this building, so this school over here gets an extra teacher, can reduce their class size. Can't do that. So not only is the state not going to do it, you're not allowed to do it inside the district either. So you can't move federal money because it comes, per program per kid, like exceptional children. You can't move federal money, can't move state money, and they're saying once it comes local, you can't move it either. Now,
And that's ultimately why we decided to state that, and I'm kind of going into what Jessica's going to talk about here in a little bit, that it isn't illegal. It is not legal because you can't do that as a district with the case study going on and what he's trying to do. That's not a legal thing that he can do.
That is correct.
All right.
That's
so for the
absolutely
case
correct.
study, the case study summary, the superintendent is making a change in how funding is allocated in the district. Prior to this level, schools were given money based on the number of students the school had. Under the superintendent's new plan, student-based budgeting would occur. These changes given to the money to school-based upon student needs, such as at-risk students who are at risk or have higher needs will be allocated more money. So as we just stated, it can't happen. Even though Jessica and I talked, it needs to happen. And in an ideal world, that's what we would want. Legally, it cannot happen.
That is correct. This is our case for this semester where the ethics and the legality don't match. And that's part of what you've got to learn is we have to follow the law, even though we don't think it's the right thing to do. Remember, I told you they're going to ask you a landmine question when you're interviewing for that administrative job. Will you follow laws and policies that you don't agree with? This is what we're talking about right here. Even though you think, well, these kids over here need a little bit more, that'd be the right thing to do. You can't do it. You got to always follow the law, policy. So this is the exemplar case of my heart's over here, but my head, I'm risking my house over here if I try to pull something like this off. Now, you say, but this is a superintendent case, but see, it filters down to the school level. You can't take money that came to your school for these kids and give it to these. You say, well, how would you do that? Well, money comes for Title I. You put regular ed kids in there because they need help too. Well, you can't do that. I mean, that's what we're talking about is you have to spend money as it's allotted to spend the way that it's allotted to spend. You can't be grouping it up and doing what you want to do. You have to follow the laws and policies that money can only be spent on what it's intended to be spent for. Now, you think everybody knows that. When these ladies get through, and by the way, great job. When y'all get through them, and I'm going to tell you that even if you think this is a far-fetched case, it's not. I'm going to give you an example from recently here in North Carolina. Go right ahead.
So we looked at the pros and cons of the superintendent's letter. Pros, he calls it student-based budgeting, which is also, and I asked Dr. Lamb this to make sure, school site-based budgeting, which allocates dollars directly to school based on number of students enrolled in specific needs of students. However, a con of that is that taxpayers of high-income schools would be upset that their money would be funding another school or district. The pros is he discusses involving parents and stakeholders in the process, which is the true form of SBB. However, tracking that money can be difficult in a large district or a district with transient students. How would you track the money as spent, which Dr. Lamb just touched on that. And this would be appropriate for a smaller school district to manage and track. funds in the perfect world. If he could do that, but legally he can't. So,
All right, so let's say for a minute here, we're talking about a public school. School board's unempowered. They can't levy taxes, so they can't be moving money around. But now the county commissioners could be moving. The county commissioners could give you, couldn't they give you a special appropriation for a specific school or a group of schools or a specific group of kids? Could the county commissioners do that? Well, theoretically they could, but since most of those county commission rates are districts, it's not very likely that they will, and they would get sued, and it would go to court. More than likely they'd lose, even if the county commissioners. The Gang of Five or Gang of Four in Mecklenburg County back in the 90s, a group got together and ran for the county commission because they were mad that the previous county commission had allotted $6 million to 3 high schools for the high school challenge as a result of Judge Manning's ruling that what was going on in CMS was genocide. And so the 3 lowest wealth high schools, they gave them $6 million. That's $2 million apiece. And those 5 people, one particular party, acted like that was all the money in the world. At that time, the budget in the district was 1.4 billion. And so 6 million represented less than 0.1% of the budget, and they acted, and they got elected on that, like that was all the money in the world. And they lost the lawsuit as well. So you can't move money, is the bottom line. People have tried it. It's political suicide, and you'll lose in court. Even the county commission will lose in court because you can't Robin Hood. You can't take from the rich and give to the poor. It's unfortunate, but that's just the way.
right. So the true question was, should schools be locally funded? They receive their public schools to ensure that students receive a solid education. However, the state and districts only responsible, the state's only responsible to make sure every student receives an equal education, regardless of the community that they live in. North Carolina's Constitution allows local governments to provide funding to their school districts. Therefore, local governments have the constitutional authority to decide how much money to give to their public schools. But North Carolina has the constitutional responsibility to guard and maintain their right to education. Funding of public schools entirely through state funds would be unfair because taxpayers in one city or county would be supporting the education of other counties' students. And then, or could disproportionate the funding between school districts, and that can create a difference. So this was kind of like looking at one side versus the other. So therefore, in the end, the superintendent was fair in writing his letter, because if you look at what school student-based cost is, he has to be transparent. So his intentions were well in trying to write the letter, but there's also a lot of questions. What's the formula plan? Is the funding based on student scores? Which, as I was reading in our book, when you start throwing in student funding based on student scores, that's a whole other mess of apple cart that can get turned over, which never ends well. You have to look at, has this been approved by the Board of Education? Because truly school site-based funding is the principals deciding what money is spent on their school based on what the district has given them. Or that's how, like, my principal explained it to me in South Carolina in our current district.
Yeah.
He doesn't really get to say a whole lot of where the money is spent. He gets told how much he gets, and ours is based off student-based costs. And then principals and staff members need to be included in decision-making if it was a true student-based, site-based plan.
Yeah, exactly. So just remember, excellent. Just remember that site-based plans are not legal in North or South Carolina. There are places that it is, that where they have district power equalizing formulas, where they do this. It is legal in some states, but it's not in either of these. But the bigger thing to remember here is that you always got to follow the law. You can't follow your heart, and whatever the law of your state is, that's what's going to happen. So in this case, no, he can't move federal money. No, he can't move state money. No, he can't move local money. So the site-based or student-based plan. And Jessica brought up a great point there. When we talk about in most of these, the heart of these is based on performance. And so the politicians really go crazy when you say, wait a minute, now this school over here is doing bad academically, performance-wise, and we're going to reward them by giving them more money. Think about how that sounds to a layperson that doesn't understand what we're doing. That does not go well. So there was a superintendent in North Carolina just before the pandemic who said, I'm smarter than everybody else in the room. And she might have been, for all I know. I met her a couple of times. I thought she was pretty smart. I'm not sure she's smarter than everybody in the room. She's just smarter than me. But, that's kind of like, being chased, me and my buddy being chased by the bear. I don't have to be faster than the bear. I just got to be faster than him. Well, she was smarter than me, but she wasn't the smartest person I ever saw. So, but anyway, so she said, what I'm going to do. Now, she was in Chapel Hill, Carborough. Now, that's truly the tale of two cities. The Chapel Hill side is white and affluent. The Carborough side is not. So the superintendent said, I'm going to give extra over here to the Carborough side. Well, extra means teachers. Well, who has to hire? Do principals actually hire teachers? Everybody go, no. The board hires teachers, right? So she knew that the board would never go for her hiring additional teachers for the schools over here, try to help the not wealthy and white kids on the Carborough side. And so what she did, she said, wait a minute. In North Carolina, in this particular district, I can spend up to $90,000, up to $89,999.99. I can spend as discretion without board approval or without county commissioner approval. So what she did was, remembering she couldn't hire extra teachers because that she don't hire. The board hires teachers. And so what she did, she contracted with a private firm to come in and offer consultative services. Basically, she went through a third-party vendor and hired more teachers for some of the schools on the Carborough side. Except the grandparent of one of the elementary kids on the Chapel Hill side was a retired principal from that district and knew the law and said, wait a minute. And so what she did was she contracted for $1 million and she had them send it to her in equal payments of $80-something thousand. Well, you can only spend that $89,000 or that $90,000 one time. She was going to make the payments every month on it over a period of time. And so she got caught. She was trying, what she was trying to do was a wonderful thing. She was trying to get more support to the disadvantaged kids on the Carborough side of the district. But the folks, again, remembering, if you give it to one, you're taking it from another. The folks that were wealthy and well-to-do, they didn't like having anything taken from their kids, and so they called foul, and of course it was, and so they fired the CFO immediately, and then the superintendent went on sick leave and was allowed to resign immediately. But you're not going to find a way around it. She thought she had found a loophole. She had not. And because the law is very clear, you're not to do this. No matter how you hook or crook it or what you try to do, you're not supposed to try to equalize the outcome. That's what the law says. Now, we could agree that may not be, we don't like that. Full disclosure, I was on the legal team for the Leandro that lost. I was on the plaintiff's side. So obviously this is still sore after 30 years. I'm still mad as hell. But you got to follow the law. You have to follow the law. So, yeah, that's the notion here. So let me share my screen quickly, and before we go to our next group, and I won't talk nearly as much this time. Let me see, get this out of the way. Let me can close some of this stuff. So if you Google Chapel Hill, Carborough, Chapel Hill superintendent, see it pops right up, resigns. Okay, so right here it tells all about it. And this is from from April of 2020, just prior. This is not 100 years ago. And it tells all about this. Contracts worth more are required to have public board vote according to district. Early contract drafts showed this partnership between them and education elements where she was paying just a little less than the 90,000. She was just trying to beat Leandro. And there's several more articles that explain it in depth. Once you've gone through this case, you'll kind of explain, you'll understand why they got her. But she was trying to beat Leandro. And she couldn't. And it got, and so she went on a medical leave and then they let her resign very quietly. But I don't know the rest of the story on this one. If I were guessing, I would guess that they're trying to get some of that money back from her. Remember, there's tort liability. They're wanting part of that 800,000 back that was paid. And so I think that was part of the negotiation when she separated from them. But it does not go well if you try to move money that you're not allowed to move. Is the point of this one. All right.
Dr. Lamb, do you ever foresee that the money will actually ever get distributed, or do you think it's just going to keep on playing out for ever and
Oh,
ever?
it's only getting worse. I talked to Kim in my Wednesday night class last night. She's up in Haywood. She worked in Raleigh. It's only getting worse. So here's the rest of the story. So Judge Lee said that the state of North Carolina through the General Assembly owes public schools $2 billion because they've not been funding adequately on the Leandro, on the basic ed, that they've not been, and the lottery's been a bust. There ain't no money coming from the lottery, and it can only go for capital anyway, buildings. And so the Republicans in the legislature are fighting that. They forced him to retire. They got another judge. They didn't like what he said, and he's out. They're on their third judge, and they're refusing to pay that. So no, this is not ever going to change. Elections have consequences. They're not wanting to pay. According to West Ed, the people who did the audit, they said that the amount that the state's been sending for a basic ed has been woefully short for the last 30 years. And it's not kept up with the times. That's what West Ed said. And they were an independent group, nonpartisan, that came in and said, the state says they're going to give a basic ed. Have they? No. They're $2 billion in arrears. But now all you'll hear from Phil Kirk and that group is choice. We'll fix this problem with choice. Well, no, you won't. That's just a way to steal the money. I truly believe as a Christian that there's a corner of hell that's hotter than the rest for people like him. I certainly hope so. And I'd go on public record to say that. People that are this heartless toward children, that have made this a political thing rather than a humanitarian thing. But that's where we are. So no, Kelly, I don't see it getting better. I only see it getting worse. Because I see that, they're behind a lot of money. They've not even been paying for a basic ed, and don't even want to pay for that. They want to do vouchers, and they want people to go, to leave public school and do that. They're trying to destroy public school, so them and their friends can get richer. It's all a money grab. It's all it is a money grab. All right. But I don't really have an opinion. I'm still mad from 30 years ago when we lost. This time. All right, group 1 goes next.
All right, group one is ready. We're about to present. All right, so group one, we ready?
Ready?
Yes. All right, so we wanted to first just kind of, the team talked about the reading that we did this for about school funding and just points that were in that reading. Is that most state budgeting are designed based upon the Department of Education guidelines. There are also 4 sources of revenue, which is the local, flow through, state, and the federal. And that the districts must estimate their revenues and expenditures and develop their budget each fiscal year. It's also the responsibility of the school board, district administration, school administration, as well as the key stakeholders such as the staff, the parents, and the students and the taxpayers. Responsibility to come up and assist with the budget. And then the purpose of school funding is to improve the operation of the district and promote student achievement. So those were key points from the chapter that we read. All right, so this is the summary of Leandro's case. In 1994, parents and children and school districts in low-wealth rural counties in North Carolina filed a lawsuit stating that students in the 5 counties were denied their right to a sound basic education under the North Carolina Constitution. In 1997 and 2004, the North Carolina Supreme Court ruled in the Leandro's case that the state constitution affirms the right of every child to the access to a sound basic education. The Leandro's case declared that inequitable and inadequate school fundings restrict access to basic and sound education for all students, especially students of color and low-income families. All right, so Carl could not be with us tonight, but we're going to be graced with his presence anyway through this video.
Hello, good peoples. This is the case overview. Just want to point out a couple of things that my group and I have noticed from this case study number 2. What we have here is the superintendent has sent out a letter to parents and the community members talking about a initiative that they have piloted at 4 schools. This initiative was named the student-based budgeting. According to our chapter 2, there's many different types of budgeting that we have learned about. We learned about the line item budgeting. We learned about the zero-based budgeting. We also learned about priority-based budgeting, but we did not learn about student-based budgeting. We learned about the site-based budgeting, which is completely different than what he has here, but my colleague Shaqueta will reference that a little bit later. This was piloted at 4 different schools in the county, and what is seen here is that our dear old superintendent is trying to change whatever formula is used and how they determine specific needs of students and how dollars move with students. So this formula that they were using was to supply dollar amounts to schools based on the students' specific needs. Something that the case study does not mention is the success rate or failure rate that these 4 schools was actually met with, nor was it met with any type of data to conclude these principals' concerns or the conversation that they had to work out their fixes. So this case study was very vague in kind of really explaining that. However, we looked at the allocating of funds was based on the number and specific need. And as the superintendent stated, this was literally putting dollars behind our stage goals and to empower school leaders. What I see standing out here is three things. Most definitely, in this overview, we see that the superintendent has a good heart. However, we are here to prove whether or not this can be done, and can this be done in a legal way. Our last point of this case overview is school principals will contact to explain the process and how parents can get involved, providing transparent communication. So we see here that this principal is most definitely, his heart is in the right place. He's trying to provide a plan of equity. He's trying to provide a plan of transparency with parents and stakeholders and the community. And he's also trying to provide flexibility. However, can this be done? This is what we are here to prove.
All right, so
I wonder how often James gets asked if he knows he looks like James. Carl gets asked if he knows he looks like James Harden. Every time I see him, that's all I can think about is James Harden, the beard.
right.
For those
All
of
right.
you who don't know who James Harden is, look it up.
So we're gonna, I know Carl wanted to kind of put his point of view in there as well. So we're gonna just kind of expound on that. So we'll go ahead back to you, Whitney.
All right, so the positive side of the plan that the superintendent had was he was very transparent with the community. So he thought, writing the letter, letting everybody know what's about to happen. That was very, transparency. He was also thinking of equity. He was trying to make sure that everyone got the same amount of funding across the board. So equitable access to sufficient resources, as stated in the Leandro's case. A lot of flexibility for the schools. They could use the funds for whatever, in his case, they needed in order to provide that sound and basic education. Also, he used the pilot group. So the superintendent listened to the 4 pilot groups, or the 4 pilot principals, and proceeded with the student-based budget. When parents and students have portable funding and can choose between schools within the district, it provides a financial incentive for those schools to improve education practices to attract and retain families.
All right, so now let's talk about the issues with the superintendent plan. First of all, it's not legal. What he did was not legal. You cannot change the state formula. Also, we kind of talked about he piloted. So when you pilot something, that means you already did it. So he piloted this plan, which to us meant he broke the law by misappropriation of funds for these 4 schools already, because like I said, he piloted it. So where did he get the money for this? When you start moving money around in other areas.
Chiquetta, that's a great question, and that's why I pulled up that one from Chapel Hill Carborough. My guesstimate is, obviously this is a case study. My guesstimate is that he used some of that discretionary money up to a certain level that doesn't require board approval. Probably used that inappropriately, but yeah, people ask me all the time, well, how did he pilot it if it's illegal? Well, again, the superintendent has a little discretionary money. In Chapel Hill Carborough, it was up to $90,000 without a board vote. That's where. But even though you're allowed to do that, you can't do it for this purpose, because that's what Leandro says. You can't do that. So Chiquetta is exactly right. He broke the law, even though he was using his discretionary money. If you use it to try to do this with it, which is just give some more and some less, not only is the state not going to do that, they expressly forbid you as a school district or superintendent from doing that as well. So yes, that is right. He used his discretionary money, but you're not allowed to do that, not for this purpose.
Okay, good. All right, so Carl did point out, he said that the superintendent called it student-based budgeting, but I think the group from teams, the last team, she said that she asked you about that, and is that still the same as the site-based budgeting?
Well, for the purposes of this case study, it most certainly is. Yeah, it's
Okay.
still based on students, which is again not legal in North or South Carolina. Neither one of those. There might be tit for tat differences, but for the purposes of this, they're the same thing. Both illegal. That's the part we have to remember.
Yeah, good, good. All right, so he did state that there was a predetermined weight, but we didn't know like how is this calculated, and then who determines the specific needs? Like, are there database decision rules to determine what deems students at risk? And then when we start talking about MTSS focusing on the whole child, is he saying that the academic risk is worth more money than attendance risk or behavior risk or SEL risk? So again, like what formula is he using to translate these dollars? And then we also want to point out about the parents. Like, what about the parents of the gifted and the general ed students? So of course we know the Leandro's case says a sound basic education for all students. So and that funding should be geared to high quality teachers and principals and adequate resources that match the students' needs. So of course we also know that gifted students need resources to match their needs as well. So how is he going to fund those resources for those other students? And then a question we said was, did he get all the stakeholders together to determine the distribution of the funds? And of course, we talk about transparency. Well, yes, he was transparent by sending the letter, but he was not transparent about what the concerns were for the principal, how those funds were specifically utilized. We know that funds should be allocated to reflect school improvement goals and desired outcomes of the district. So what accountability measures were used to determine that this plan was successful for those 4 schools?
And then we got into the ethical paradigms. When it comes to justice, we want to make sure we have equity for all students. But here, when the superintendent was trying to provide equity, he broke the law, because the law is that by state and local funds, it has to be equal. So with that, he followed the ethical paradigm, but the law was not followed. Here we say he would have to revert the money, or if he goes through the plan, he would get penalized in some form or fashion. And when you're looking at compliance, you have to make sure you're complying legally, but you are a good steward of that money. And here he was not complying legally, and he wasn't a good steward of that money.
And I love that bullet. I love that bullet. He'll get fined or penalized. That is exactly right. They'll have to give the money back, but he'll get fined or penalized as well, or both. And that's what we're talking about, that Chapel Hill case. Yeah, but they'll get the money back, but also you may be on the hook personally for that money.
Mm-hmm.
And looking at our care paradigm, our leaders, superintendents, principals have to demonstrate that they care, they're loyal, they are trustworthy, and they have relationships with all stakeholders. Here, the superintendent definitely cared. He wanted to provide extra funding to help the low-income students with their educational need. However, as we said before, this was illegal according to the students' Leandro rights. We also mentioned that with these disadvantaged schools, perhaps he could look into Title I funds to try to close the educational gap, but moving the local money or the state money was not the answer that he was looking for.
An ethical paradigm criteria is responsible for keeping educators sensitive to the inequalities and differences that occur in the school community. And so in this case, unfairly money allocated. We think about Oprah, when Oprah said, you get a car, you get a car, you get a car. But when we think talking about students, we can't say this student get this formula, this student get this formula, this student get this formula. We just can't just deem which student gets what formula. Also, money following students and students' diverse needs. When you talk about student diverse needs, that's a lot. So is that, who are these students? What's the criteria for these students? Like we said earlier, could it be students' attendance or behavior problems? Could it be ELL? Could it be single family homes? What was the criteria for when they said student with diverse needs? And then profession are principles that govern the behavior of a person or group. The law is the law, and we have to adhere to the law, and we have to be accountable. And in our profession, that's what we have to do. We have to adhere to the law across board, not just for certain ones and certain schools, because then it can get really messy and it can get all crazy. But we have to make sure that we're following the law. And one thing that Tom Whitaker said in his book, sometimes it's not even about programs, it's about the people in your building.
That's a good point.
And so we talked as a group about how he could revise his course of action. For step one, he could have discussed his plan with an attorney. He could have told him this is illegal, you need to stop, pump your brakes. He also could have talked to his peers. In the case study, he talked to principals, but sometimes your employers are not, or your employees are not willing to tell you where they think you are wrong. So here, if he had to talk to a peer or a district attorney, maybe they could have advised him before sending out the letter. We also talked about revising the plan to legally provide the equal education and find a different way to supplement the differences. For one, he could look at Title I allocations and use the Title I fund for specific initiatives or for specific populations to help those students. In chapter 2, we talked about the increasing sales tax on non-essential products that could help in that county. Also reviewing the plan to make sure his money went to help with academic achievement. You know, maybe they could look at something else and move money in their plan to better help those schools.
He's getting fluids now for the athletic trainer, excuse me.
Oh, 1 second.
Looks to be in good spirits. Lynch on the steal. He goes up.
Okay, I muted everybody. Excellent presentation. All right, I'm gonna play devil's advocate for a few things. All right. So the question was asked, how would you determine if you had again, not legal in North or South Carolina, if you had a site-based or student-based budgeting formula, how would you determine who got what? Well, unfortunately, the only accepted standard across the United States of America is the federal guidelines for free and reduced lunch. And we know how bad that is. And that's always the argument is, well, if we went to that, we'd have to use these standards, and that's been a disaster. And so that's part of the excuse when people say, why don't you want to do the right thing? Well, this is worse than what we got now. In many ways, it is bad. I'll tell a quick story. I was principal in 2 low wealth districts before I went to Charlotte. I didn't, I only got to go uptown later on in my life. I had to work out in the woods for the first half of my career. And one of the low wealth districts where I was principal, unfortunately, back in those days, the principal had to review all of the forms and decide who got free and reduced lunch. It's done differently than that now, but back 35 years ago, that's not the way it was. And so I had a very large non-English speaking population. After the Vietnam War, we had a lot of refugees came to the United States, Hmong population. Now the Hmong hill tribes across Laos, Cambodia, and Vietnam were US supporters. And many of them migrated to the United States, got asylum here. And there was a large population in the school where I was principal of Hmong, and we had a language barrier. And so the mother came in and was upset that I had adjudicated that her family only got reduced lunch and not free lunch. And, I was trying my best to explain. And finally I said, you've either got to make less money or have more children. 2 hours later, she showed up with a new baby in her arms. Can't make that up. So Absolutely a true story. 2 hours later, another baby. Free lunch for you. I told her less money, more kids. She showed up with another kid. And that's part of the abuses of the free and reduced lunch system. So that's not a bargain either. So that's a great point, is there's not really a good way to determine who ought to get it and who ought not, because that's the only acceptable standard that we use, and it's not a good one. I'll just tell you, it's not a good one. Kelly, unmute yourself. I'm gonna pick on you for a minute.
Okay.
I'm gonna give you the battlefield promotion. Tomorrow you're gonna be principal at Ardrey Kell.
Okay.
All right, but here's
I don't want
the
the job.
Here's the catch. Don't say that yet. Here's the catch. We're gonna advertise, and in 2 weeks, we're gonna have a parent meeting. And you're gonna have to tell the parents that we're gonna lose 6 teachers next year, because what we're gonna do is we're gonna give 6 teachers to Garinger High School to help them because they're not doing really well. How do you think that would go with your parents? Now, this is a place that's got everything. When I mean everything, they've got AstroTurf on their ball field. They got better facilities than most colleges. They've got everything. But you're going to have to give up
6 teachers, and we've got subs rotating in and out of those 6 teachers.
But you're going to lose 6 positions. Those six vacancies you have right now, we're just going to take those.
Okay.
We're just going to take those, but you got to tell the parents, and that we're going to give them to a low wealth high school across town to try to help them.
The parents would be in an uproar. Our parents are wealthy. Obviously, they have connections. They're going to reach out to everybody and their brother and cause a stink and try to pull their weight to try to get that to not to happen.
Yeah, they're not. No matter how eloquent you are and what an impassioned speech that you could give those group of parents. I live with the same crowd in the northern end of the county, by the way, full disclosure. I live in a private neighborhood of 158 houses on the water. No poor people. No poor people. No. And I could only imagine if I had to go to them and say, your local high school here, Huff, we're going to take 6 teaching positions and give them to Garinger or West Mac or West Charlotte. Because those kids need more than your kids need. They would shoot you before you got out of the room. So you got to remember that that's part of this too, is although we might all think that this is absolutely the right thing to do, there's a large segment of the population, probably 45%, that would argue vehemently that that's not the right thing to do, to take stuff from their kids.
Well, and I think they would also argue that they're paying more in taxes. So,
oh, they would.
They deserve those extra things because they're paying more money.
Exactly, they are. That's why I said I live in the town of Cornelius in the county of Mecklenburg. Our taxes are the highest in the state by far, $1.50. Where I'm sitting tonight, it's 70 cents. Now, understanding that a house that would be 200,000 here would be $1 million there also in terms of valuation. My house at Lake Norman didn't go up just went up an additional $160,000 a year in valuation last year. In one jump. Your house is worth 160,000 more. My tax bill looks like most people's mortgage. And so, yes, that would not be a sympathetic ear if you tried to tell them that you're going to take from them to give to others. They would argue just as voraciously on the other way around. Now, the only other thing, when I read through your presentation, Title I, I need you to be real careful about Title I. I think I've mentioned this before, but let me mention it again. There's a difference between being a Title I school and a Title I program. Title I is federal, and it's support for reading and math for disadvantaged children. Generally, you get teachers and money. I had Title I programs at 2 of the schools where I was principal. But here's the trick. If you are a Title I school, that means every child in your building can share equally in the teachers or the money for Title I. And that generally means you're at or above 80% free and reduced lunch. If you're at 50%, but not above 80, you are a Title I program. Well, we said, well, Dale, that's just semantics. No, it's not. In a Title I program school, only Title I kids can share in those teachers or money. So my quick story on that one is I was down in Chinquapin, North Carolina. If you've ever been there, you got there by accident. No, you can't find it even hunting it. You turn off of 40 at Highway 42, halfway between Raleigh and Wilmington, and you head toward Topsail, and you go through a part of the world. Your GPS just sets and spins. You can't even find where you are on the map. It's important to know that part, because when I got there, I had to wait an hour to see the principal because they were having a Title I audit. I had to go back 2 weeks later to meet the new principal. I've already told you this story. He put non-Title I kids in a Title I class. You don't do that but once. So while Title I is the support for economically disadvantaged kids, you got to make sure that they have very stringent guidelines as well. So you can't take these kids over here and say, well, they could do with some extra support in reading as well. I'll just put them in the Title I class. If you're not a Title I school, that's a violation of federal law. Cannot do that. So you got to be careful with Title I. That is that's a great idea, but know the law on Title I as well, what you can and can't do, because you don't misspend their money but once, and then the next person gets the opportunity. That's unfortunate, but that's the real world. Excellent job. Excellent. We'll have to start calling Carl James Harden. All right. Group 2.
Okay, so pretty much as all the other groups have said, we're going to look at case study 2. And we're going to start out with Leandro versus the state of North Carolina. I mean, I don't know if you want me to go through all that again?
No, you don't have to go through that. Just tell us what you found out.
Okay, basically that those 5 counties had sued, and basically what we found out was that there was no constitutional right to equal funding. All students have a right to the opportunity to receive a sound basic education, and it's the responsibility and obligation of the state to safeguard and deliver every child's Leandro's rights. And we did kind of go into what did they define a basic education as.
Yep.
And so a basic education is the sufficient ability to read, write, and speak the English language, and sufficient knowledge of fundamental mathematics, physical science to enable the students to function in a complex and rapidly changing society, sufficient fundamental knowledge of geography, history, basic economic and political systems to enable the student to make informed choices with regard to issues that affect the students personally or affect the student's community, state, and nation. And I think it's important to note that it just says basic. Sufficient academic and vocational skills to enable the student to successfully engage in post-secondary education or vocational training, and sufficient academic and vocational skills to enable the students to compete. And I thought this was interesting because it does say to compete on an equal basis with others in further formal education or gainful employment in contemporary society. I thought that inclusion of on an equal basis kind of makes that an interesting statement when you say that that they are entitled to that. Dr. Lamb, what do you think about that? Like that it says that they can compete on an equal basis, but if you're not necessarily giving them all that other counties have, can they really do that?
Well, but they're just competing for a high school diploma. See, that's all they're guaranteeing, that they'll be competitive for a high school diploma.
Okay.
See anything on here that would lead you to believe that they'll be ready for college or prepare them with advanced level courses or AP or IB or any of those kinds of things?
Yeah. Okay.
What they're saying is when y'all aren't, remember, I started school before the Civil Rights Act. And during that time, and even the legacy of that lasted for a long time, even through by the time by me finishing high school. You had 3 tracks, and once you were in them, that was it. You had the vocational track that was going to prepare you to go to the military or get a job as a carpenter or bricklayer or woodworker or something like that. Then you had the general track, and then you had only one group of kids, one class full of kids were your college prep kids. You had one. You had one. That was it in high schools. But all that you were guaranteed was vocational or general. And some high schools didn't even have the one college prep track. I was lucky enough to go to a high school that had the one college prep, had a college prep track. Now there was one high school in the district that didn't even have that. And there was one that most of the kids were in that, because that was the high school in the county seat. Now, what does the county seat in, North Carolina has 100 counties. There's 100 school districts, and there's 14 city systems that are still around from pre desegregation days, pre Civil Rights Act. But the thing is, remembering that in the county seat high school, they always had better than everybody else, because they had the doctors and lawyers, because that's where the hospital was and where the courthouse was. So the doctors, lawyers, and Indian Chief, their high school, half the kids might have been in the college prep track. But if you were out somewhere besides the county seat high school, like I said, the county that I went to high school in were 3 high schools. One had a majority of their kids at the county seat high school in college prep. One didn't have any. And I was lucky enough that the one that I went to had one class, and I do mean one class of 30 students. That's all they had room for. That was it. And if you weren't in that group, good luck to you getting in college. Wasn't going to happen for you. And if you were at the other high school, you had no chance. So all the state, this harkens back to that time where all we're going to guarantee you is a basic education to finish high school and get a vocational job or get a job, with a high school diploma. That's all North Carolina says that you need, because they're not willing to pay for anything else. So this is a vestige of a different time that we've never been able to get past in this state. That's why our teachers are paid so little, and why we spend so little of our economic product in this state. We still have places that want to go back to pre-1954. That's just it. But yeah, you can be competitive, but on the basis of a vocational or a general education. Doesn't say anything. It never even alludes to the fact that you need to go to college at all.
Okay. I think this was Amanda.
Tori.
Yeah, I was talking. Yeah,
Okay.
I looked up the research on the North Carolina law provision for disbursement of state money, and it was saying that deposit money in the state treasurer to credit a local school administrator units shall be made in monthly installments and additional as necessary, and such time and in such a manner as may be most convenient for the operation of public school system. And also, before an installment is credited, the school finance officer shall certify to State Board of Education the expenditures to, I'm sorry, y'all, be made by the local school administrator unit from the state public school fund during the month, and the State Board of Education shall determine whether the monies requisition are due the local school administrative unit, and upon determining the amount due, shall cause the requisite amount to be credited to the local school administrative units. And I pulled that law up because even throughout the process of how the money goes from one situation to the next in the system, there's nowhere listed that the superintendent or anybody should be moving any money.
That is
So
correct.
I just wanted to share that by
Well,
law.
thank you. All right,
And the
so
law
let
number.
me remind you, we've talked about this. So when the state says we're going to give you $8,000 per pupil for all the school for kids in your district, there's some things that you got to know about that. First is they only pay the $8,000 for the kids that attend, not the ones on the roll. So they subtract your attendance. That's why you have to do attendance every day. That the PMR, the principal's monthly report, and they subtract the absenteeism from that. So if your district absentee rate is 5%, they subtract 5% from that 8,000. They take $4,000 off. They take $400 off of that 8,000 per year. Now, to Tori's point, they don't send you the $8,000 at the first of the year. You have to have money on hand in your district to pay for the first month of school. You got to pay for it yourself. Then you send the voucher to them. If they find that you have spent the money correctly, they reimburse that at $800 per kid minus the absentee rate. They don't give you 8,000. They give you 810 monthly installments. And so they control you. If they find that you have misspent the money, guess what they won't do? They won't reimburse you what you spent if you have misspent the money. That's how they ensure compliance, that you spend their money correctly. They don't give it all to you at one time. They make you spend your money first. They reimburse your money, reimburse your money, reimburse. And they subtract absenteeism. They don't, even though the kids are on the roll, doesn't matter. If they didn't show up, you don't get paid for them that day. They make you spend yours first and reimburse. And if they found that you have spent money incorrectly, they will not send you their money. DPI calls that flipping the switch. I know that sounds flippant, but that's exactly what they call it. When they call you up and say this is wrong or this is not right or you misspent this or you didn't send data, we're going to flip the switch. What that means is you're not going to get money that month. And you better believe you'll get that paperwork right and get it in, pronto, pretty damn quick, because they're going to flip the switch on you. So that's how they ensure compliance, that you don't just go do whatever you want to do, come up with some plan like this and then say, well, too bad, so sad, you gave us the money, we spent it the way we wanted to. They don't give you the money. They dole it out in 10 installments minus attendance. And they're not required to give it to you. Only if they deem that how you have spent their money appropriately, will they give it back? Will they reimburse you?
All right. For the superintendent's plan is basically we've all said he wanted to allocate money based on students enrolled and the specific needs of those students. He wanted to roll out a budget based on feedback that he received from his pilot schools. He wanted the money to address students and the school's diverse needs. And he wanted, his plan would have the money follow the students. So the concerns that we found was that the superintendent does not have the legal right to spend federal or state funds. The school board must present their budget allocated money assignment to be approved by the county commissioner. School funding should ensure equal access to a sound basic education for all students. The federal funding is provided for specific federal programs, so he would not need to allocate money for students based on this. And state funds are allocated per pupil and is equitable for all students in the state.
And then what we talked about is what the school district could do to help bridge the gap between the higher revenue districts compared to the low revenue districts. It said in our reading that not all school districts or school systems should not just use one form of budgeting allocation. It should use the combination of them. It also spoke to other ways that they could probably get it. The primary source of revenue, of course, is the local level, at the local level, so property taxes, but that the districts could also seek out other forms of revenue such as fundraising, student fees, private and public partnerships, parent school community engagement, and also grant access to technology and things like that to help try and get more money into the school district to maybe help with some areas of growth.
Mhm.
And that was what we had.
Okay, so let me remind you of a couple things. The low wealth districts, their argument was that they were having to spend all of their local money from their county commissioners on their on capital needs, which is buildings and grounds and keeping them up. Because remember, a lot of states in 1966, in response to the Civil Rights Act and integration of schools, decided, well, we're not going to go along with this, so we're no longer going to build schools. And see how you can do, basically as a knee-jerk reaction to the Civil Rights Act. So in North Carolina in 1966 and South Carolina, they got out of the capital funding business. And so school districts have to levy taxes, bonds, have to pay for their own buildings and the upkeep of those buildings. And so if you're in a low wealth district with a low property tax base, again, stuff's not valued nearly high here as where I live elsewhere, and the millage is low. And if there's not businesses here, there's not corporate, so they just don't have the way to do that. And so the notion here is on that is this county that I'm in tonight is strapped just to keep all their buildings open. And so hence, that's where the North Carolina and South Carolina education lotteries came from. At the end of the Leandro case, they said, we get it that so what we'll do is we'll help you with your capital through, here's a lottery. Except the lottery, by the time they pay the winners, pay the company, the idiot that wears that signboard that they advertise on TV every time that's on into house, there's no money left. And it's completely pork barrel. What that means is it's completely political and who gets that little bit of capital money that comes from the lottery, but none of it comes to help pay for teachers or actually educating a child. I mean, even if any money comes out of the lottery, it's only for buildings. It does not pay for more teachers or any of the things that we know that actually make a difference in the life of a child. And so the lottery has turned out to be a complete bust in terms of helping improve education. And what little money there is completely a political pork barrel and is used to reward our friends and punish our enemies. And so that's why we've had to kind of go to public-private partnerships. Like in the county that I'm in now, the McNair Foundation, he went to one of the local high schools that he recently died, but he owned the Houston Oilers, wealthy man. The McNair Foundation has helped the county schools here tremendously. Full disclosure, that partnership was done by my first cousin. So, but she did a great job when she was superintendent here. She's since retired. She did a great job here and got that McNair Foundation established. And that has been the best thing that's happened to this school district in 40 years or more, is that McNair Foundation money. Now, we could talk about the idiot son who's running the team now and what kind of people they are, but it has done a good thing for the county schools in this county. And that was a public-private partnership. Part of the problem, the grant fallacy, and I've got one more thing. That's a good idea is grants. The problem with grants is the term in kind. If you know what in kind means, is most grants have an in kind portion to them. That means matching, basically. That we're going to give you this much, and in kind you have to contribute an equitable amount. Well, only the wealthiest districts can do that. If we're going to give you $1 million grant, but you got to match $1 million. Well, if we had the $1 million, we wouldn't need your grant to start with. So that's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy on grants for low wealth districts. They don't have the matching money, what we refer to as in-kind money. They don't have that. So but foundation money, fundraising, fundraising, that's really hard. But there's out doing that, but there's ways that you can kind of make that up. One more thing before we get to the last group here. I want to make sure that we go back and do our legal underpinning here. And I've got this pulled up. This is the part that we've referenced several times tonight, and I want to make sure that you understand what the court held. North Carolina, not local school districts, has the ultimate constitutional obligation to actively safeguard. All right, no exceptions, no excuses. All right, it has all these things. But right here, not only do they not have it, no exception, not right here, this part means that local school districts can't do it either. The state is not going to differentiate the money, but neither can the local school district either. So even if, what I was talking about a few minutes ago, even if you had some local discretionary money and you raised your own money and you got a grant, or you got a partnership like with the McNair Foundation, you still can't use it to give more to some and less to others. Even if you come up with the money on your own, even if you're using discretionary money like the superintendent, even if you're using partnership money. Again, what does Leandro say? Nope, you're not allowed to do that. We're not going to do it, and you aren't allowed to do it even with your own money that you've come up with on your own. So that's kind of that's one of the fallacies of the whole thing is that, yeah, we'll go out and raise our own money and do this. Yeah, but according to the law, you can't use it to give more to some and less to others either. And so you walk a fine line there, even if you can do your own resource development. And to Justin's point, and come up, that's a great point, Justin. I like that. If you can come up with your own money, you still got to be real careful about how you even allot your own money, to not run afoul of this court ruling. And you better believe the wealthy parents in your district will hawk you on that deal if they think that somebody else's kid is getting something that theirs isn't, even though theirs might have more than they ever need. They will hawk you on this point. And so so a lot of the programs, just like here in this county, they're open to every kid. Now, mostly only the disadvantaged kids take advantage of them. But the program can't just say, well, you can do this, but you can't because your parents make this much. It has to be open to everybody. That's one of the ways that they got around that when Janet set up that foundation here and established some of the programs. The doors were open for anybody that wanted to come. The tutoring and the extra help that kids got through that program, it had to be available to everybody. So you still, even though you get your own money, the point on that one is, even though if you find your own money, the law still says that you can't use it to differentiate between kids. Seems a little excessive, but that's the law. All right, we're ready for our final brief of the evening. Bring forward now. Y'all went last time. Y'all have to go first next time.
I think that's fair.
It is nice to hear what everybody has to say and just
Well, I know.
be like what they said.
You don't get to sit in the back and coast and let everybody else block the wind off of you. No drafting here, like them bicyclists do over in Europe.
Okay. We just want to introduce ourselves again as the last group. And we are Neely Potts, Terrence Thornton, and Mallory Freeman. And if I can get the slide to change, that would be great. Oops, sorry. All right, go ahead.
All right. So just a quick overview of the case study, which I know we've heard from our other three groups, but what is happening here is the superintendent is informing parents and community members of a new student-based budgeting plan. And according to this plan, funding will no longer be used based on the number of students and staff, but on students and schools' diverse needs. But as we've heard echoed many times, the superintendent made up this plan It did not follow the law for creating a budget. Funding is based on the Department of Education guidelines and should be used to create a budget. Money can't be moved, as we've heard time and time again from Dr. Lamb, and the superintendent must follow the law on school budget and funding. Mallory, if you'll go to the next slide.
Okay.
So the Leandro case, which we've talked about in detail already tonight, as we know, is this lawsuit filed against the state of North Carolina on these due to low tax revenue from these 5 rural districts in North Carolina. But as we know, the Constitution does not give school districts the right to funding, but the right to a sound basic education. So when I think of this, I think of a car. You're getting the base model. You're not getting the EX. You're not getting the limited edition. You're getting that base model. Every student, that's what they're going to get. And as we've talked about earlier, the sound basic education includes the following things that we've seen listed with previous groups: that ability to read and write in English, obtain knowledge in math and science, geography, history, and economics, be able to make informed decisions in society, to gain academic and vocational skills, which will prepare students to potentially have secondary education or have vocational training, which will prepare them to compete with their peers in an academic or vocational setting. But like Dr. Lamb said earlier, it's to make sure their students are able to obtain a high school diploma. All right, Terrence, I think you're up next.
Yes, ma'am. And we went into the ramifications of the superintendent's decision. So we're saying like the things that happen afterwards, that the basically what the ramifications we said are creating a student-based budget is unlawful and the superintendent is going to lose his job. So basically just saying he did wrong. It's completely wrong, and he will lose his job for the decision that he made when he actually did the site-based budget and the student-based budget. Basically, he knew that was wrong, and so it's going to catch up with him. And when he catches up with him, he's going to lose his job. He's going to get fired. He's going to lose his job. The next thing we were saying, this is going to cost in penalties and fines. It will end up using money from the budget to pay fines that was supposed to be kind of revenues. So you're looking at kind of taking 2 steps forward, but then you're taking 3 steps back because you're going to end up with the money, but then you're going to have to pay the fines and stuff because you actually made the wrong decision. The state and the federal, they're going to come in, they're going to take all that money back. They're going to say, here's these fines and you got to do this. So then you're going to have an even smaller budget to work with. So even with that guy, the superintendent who loses his job, the superintendent that comes in after him needs to realize also that he's going to have a smaller budget because some of that money is going to have to go towards trying to get all this stuff fixed. You're going to have to get it all straight. So it's a weird, but it's weird that you would try and take 2 steps forward and go 3 steps backwards. Then while creating the superintendent plan to make more funding equitable, it is the potential to make it less equitable for some schools based on the school's population. So just saying that some of the schools are going to get shafted, kind of. They're going to get got.
Yeah.
Because they don't have all the population that they need in order to get increased funds. It's going to be where it's I kind of say if you can't do it for one, then don't do it. You know, if you can't do it for all, then don't do it for one. That's your even, like I say, when they come in, if it's one you're going to do for one school, you got to do it for all the schools. And that wouldn't be the case with this base budget that he's talking with, the site-based budget. And he can basically kind of pick and choose, and they will be short because their population, they might not have the criteria for some of the money. And the last thing we were saying ramification-wise are angry stakeholders and community, because they might be at a school that's not receiving some of the student-based funding. So if I'm paying taxes and my son or my daughter is not at a school that receiving the money, I'm mad. It's going to be a problem. And so with the people in the community, they're going to look at it like, hey, why is this school getting the money and we're not getting the money? We're all putting in, so I think it's going to be a problem. So that would be the ramifications of the superintendent's decision.
Mm-hmm. And the ones that they're getting money taken from their school are even going to be madder than that.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely.
Not only is their school not going to get money, we're going to take 6 positions. Try to sell that to your parent group.
Exactly.
So the ethical paradigms that we've talked about in our group that were involved, or a lot of what one of the other group had said, but we put them all on one side because we felt like they really kind of overlapped, because the overall thought is, whether it's in critique, profession, justice, or even care, even though you had the right intentions, it wasn't lawful and you didn't do the right thing. So in the critique area, we talked about how the idea for the budget only addressed certain populations. And even though we want to focus on helping every child with different needs and we want to be just, it's not fair. And the law needs to be fair. Money follows the students. So staffing and resources could be affected by certain populations. In the plan itself, in critique, it left a lot of questions. And I know that that was just a letter to the community, but even with a letter to the community is made up of a lot of different stakeholders that know, that understand those things, especially when it comes to their money, and they're going to have the questions. So why not go ahead and put something more than, hey, we tried this out and it works, so I'm gonna do it this way. In the professional area, like I just said, if they had if it was legal to do, if they would have just included additional data and documentation, that would have supported accountability and transparency. And it became unfair to students who were not in those poor areas, just like Terrence talked about. And then it's a legal activity with state funding, so that's unprofessional. And then, of course, again, in the justice area, it's not lawful, and they're revising funding is the job of the state, and and even federal. It's not the LEA's job. And last but not least, the ethical paradigm of care. There's a quote that says, good intentions may do just as much harm as malevolence if they lack understanding. And I felt like that was an important point for all of us in every case study that we do, because ignorance seems to be the driving factor of whether or not the person is doing the right thing. They didn't follow the process in this case, and they didn't think about the repercussions of the decision.
Right.
So I'm glad we're the last group that went, because we're just reiterating the lessons that were learned in this. And the first lesson is you can't go rogue with your budget and money allocations because it's against the law. The next lesson is your decisions as a leader affect more than just you, especially if you have a group of people following you. We included the thought that even though these principals in the pilot group that that superintendent used may not lose their jobs, but they're going to get grilled and questioned, and why were you a part of this, and what part of this did you have? And that takes time. And so of course their families, their jobs would most likely be up in the air, just as well as the financial department. Also the incoming superintendent, as Terrence stated, is going to have a mess to fix when that superintendent has to leave and go probably find a different career. So and this overall, the students will be the worst hit, because this whole fight over where this money goes for these students, they're going to end up not even getting it. And that's the saddest part of either the Leander case or even just this case study, if it were even true. The next lesson is the formula is not changing. We looked at the timeline of the Leandro case and how long it has gone on and how much it's gone back and forth. And we didn't want to waste, not waste your time, but take up all your time going through that. But it pretty much, in summation, is that formula is not changing. And the state is going to continue to argue that it's not about the money and the amount of money. It's we're giving you money. It's what you're doing with that money and who you're doing that money with, and the time and talent that you put in with the money that we give you. And last but not least, I feel like we say this every time we talk about something, is start with what the law says. Then do what you think is best for students within spending guidelines or any type of guideline that we go over in this class. And make sure as a leader, you have accountability measures in place and that you are transparent with anything that you are sharing with the community, because it's important for people to know that you are holding yourself accountable by being knowledgeable of laws and procedures and policies, because good intentions do not hold any weight in. And on the last note that has nothing to do with this, I am a personal friend of Carl, and he gets James Harden all the time, especially when James Harden was like big. And he also said to tell his team and Dr. Lamb that they won and now they're going to regionals.
Congratulations to the Lincoln Charter Eagles. Congratulations.
Yay.
That's great. That's good news. Thank you for that.
We did too. We did too.
Right.
We
I was going to say,
too.
Terrence, how'd y'all do?
We won.
Congratulations.
We won by 2 points. It was a crazy game by 2 points.
Well, yeah, there's no pictures in the record book, though. A win's a win. That's all that matters. By 1 or 100, that's a good thing. I'm very pleased with your presentation. Mallory, some excellent points at the end. Remember, this is a case of misfeasance. The superintendent, did the wrong thing, didn't do it for the wrong. He didn't knowingly know it was wrong, but he did the wrong thing. That's giving him the benefit of the doubt. Now, I'm going to make an editorial comment. It's crazy to me that I've been teaching this case for Gardner-Webb for 13 years. This is one that has followed all these years. We've changed some of the others to make them a little more modern, but this one has stayed constant. And I never thought that I would see a time when somebody would actually do this. But now, full disclosure about Chapel Hill, again, I've met that lady. That she's smarter than me is no great shakes, but she thought she was smarter than everybody. She knew it was wrong and did it anyway. So hers was malfeasance. She knew it was wrong and illegal, but she thought she was smart enough to pull it off. Why in the community that she was in, she wasn't in one of the far east or far west rural counties where you might could have gotten away with it. She was in Chapel Hill, for Christ's sake. I mean, that's some of the smartest people around there. I mean, but she really thought she was smarter than they were, that she could pull this off. But so that was a complete case of malfeasance there. We'll give this superintendent the benefit of the doubt and say this was just misfeasance. He did the wrong thing unknowingly. But the point is, you got to know, you're not going to get a pass either way. You're going to have to revert the money. They're going to penalize you, and you're probably going to get fined and have to pay a bunch of money yourself. You're going to be lucky to stay out of jail if you do something like this. But the reason why we started at the upper level is the law flows down from the county commission, from the state legislature to the county commission, to the school board, to the superintendent, down to the principal. You've got to understand how money and responsibility flows. We don't do a school case on finance because that would be our perspective would only be inside the school. You've got to understand how money flows up and down. And if you do that, then you'll be so much better off when you get out in a real situation. And so, again, I couldn't be more pleased with all of you. All of your work has been great. Your evidence work, your weekly work. I would stress, get out and talk to people rather than sending emails when you interview folks. I think there's a richness of data there. And so we're going, as always, let our resident principal close us out tonight with her thoughts on this case and school funding and budgeting.
These were great presentations. You all laid it out very clear, very detailed. I can tell that you understood the the thought behind it is one thing, but you have to remember that you've got to follow the rules regardless of how you feel they sound. Their processes, documentation, any type of accountability for any type of money that you're going to be spending. You've got to be on point with funding. And Mallory said it best, you can't go rogue. Just because you have a great idea, you can't just spend the money. You have to go by the processes and the procedures. So just keep that in mind. And these were excellent presentations. Thank you so much. And I hope you all learned as much as I've learned listening to you all. So I enjoyed it.
It was great. Couldn't be more pleased. All right, so we'll see you next week. We'll talk about special ed. If you can, get out and interview your EC chair before next week. And so if you have any questions, hopefully we'll be able to work through them if you have any. But I've enjoyed it. Back to 1 hour next week, and I'll see you then. Everybody have a good week. Thank you.
Bye-bye.